こんばんは。フォレックス TV ニューヨークのレミです。3月11日火曜日の為替レポートニューヨークレビューをお伝えします。11日のアメリカ株式市場は急反発しました。ダウ工業株30種平均は前日比416ドル66セント高の 12,156 ドル81セントで終えた。ナスダック総合株価指数は前日比 86.42 ポイント高の 2255.76 で終えた。今朝 FRB は政府機関債や格付けの高い住宅ローン担保証券などを対象に米国債を貸し出す制度を導入すると発表しました。ニューヨーク外国為替市場で円売りの動きが優勢となりました。ドル円は前日比1円65銭円安ドル高の103円35銭から45銭で取引を終えた。またユーロ円は前日比2円45銭円安ユーロ高の158円50銭から60銭で取引を終えた。それではデイリー FX.com のボリス・ロスバーグさんとのインタビューをご覧ください。
Well, earlier this morning we saw quite a seesaw session with euro dollar hitting a record high, and then after the Fed Reserve announcing its latest plan to inject liquidity into the financial system along with other central banks, we saw the euro pull back against the US currency. But before we get into the major currencies pairs, if you could tell us how you think the latest Fed's action will be effective in terms of the market.
Well, I think it's very much an open question. The Fed is desperately trying to avoid the Japanese experience. They really want to make sure they can reflate the system so basically we don't have a deflationary spiral in the U.S. financial system. Critically, the credit spreads, of course, are very, very important. That's been the whole action of the Fed right now, is to try to make sure the credit spreads come back in line so people are willing to lend, willing to take on risk. And whether this is going to work, of course, I think remains to be seen. It's certainly been a boost of confidence for the market so far, and the Fed is desperately trying to do everything possible in their power to change the market psychology. We'll see if it's working.
Okay, Boris, and indeed, following today's announcement from the Federal Reserve, we saw U.S. equities soar across the board, and also as a result, we saw dollar-yen gain in today's session. But let's start out with euro-dollar, since it did hit another record high, almost close to the 155 level.
Right.
So, Boris, we do have plenty of event risk, and we still have more U.S. data coming out this week. So, in the near term, where do you see euro-dollar trading?
Well, we actually were feeling that the euro dollar was getting grossly overbought at this 155 level. There was also commentary from ECB chief Jean-Claude Trichet, basically becoming very, very worried about the 155. I think the European officials don't mind the euro appreciating in a slow, orderly fashion, but when it rises 5-7 handles in a period of several weeks, it becomes critically painful for a lot of their exporters who try to hedge their positions continuously. So far, the decoupling thesis is really working. The Eurozone economy seems to be doing much better than the U.S. economy. All the data we have coming across on the tape has been relatively positive, has been surprising to the upside. The data from the U.S. has been doing nothing but surprising to the downside, with one exception, which was today's trade deficit, which finally showed some serious improvement due to exchange rate adjustments. Basically, exporters are starting to really pick up the slack on the U.S. side. And if it weren't for the fact that oil prices are at record highs, the trade deficit actually would have been much better than it before. And that's sort of the hope of the dollar bulls, is that exporters can pull us out of this funk through exchange rate differential adjustments. That having been said, we do think the euro dollar is very overbought at this point. On a short-term basis, it probably made an emotional peak and likely to retrace back to the 150 level. However, going forward, long term, we clearly still remain euro bulls, because there's still very little on the horizon to determine whether the U.S. economy is actually going to be able to come out of this without a recessionary trough. And the whole notion that the U.S. economy slows in the first half of the year and then comes back in the second half of the year really remains to be seen. It's simply taken on a matter of faith that we would come back. But I don't see any real evidence of what would propel the U.S. economy to go forward, given that we have all this implosion in the real estate market going forward.
And Boris, it is interesting to see the reaction in the market, especially following last Friday's non-farm payrolls release, and also given the latest recession concerns. Right now in the market, it seems as though expectations for even more aggressive rate cuts ahead of the Fed meeting in terms of an intermeeting cut seem to have subsided. But we do have the rate announcement coming up next week. What do you expect the Fed to do?
We're with the consensus. We think they'll go 50 basis points and probably take them another 50 basis points before the first half of the year is over, down to 2%, in order to try to stabilize the housing market as much as possible. This seems to be a critical point for them, because the key thing with housing is you want to avoid as many bankruptcies as possible, so that you don't have this vicious cycle of wealth destruction, which will then go all the way through the economy and affect other sectors like autos, retail, everything else, restaurants, and really create a very, very serious contraction. That's what the Fed is desperately trying to avoid by hoping to stabilize the housing market and prolong the issue, basically, so that we can reflate ourselves back to health. We'll see if it works.
以上、dailyfx.com のボリス・ロスバーグさんとのインタビューでした。ForexTV ニューヨークのレミがお伝えしました。最新の為替情報については ForexTV ジャパンをご覧ください。